that unless we have Daniel all figured out for the time of the end, we don't have a lot of business looking at other prophecies. You know, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. And I'm not saying that we discard those prophecies, but when Yeshua was asked a specific question, what are the signs of your coming and the end of the age? He points us back to Daniel. You know, if we're followers of Yeshua, we really need to go in the direction that he points us. And that's to Daniel. I keep telling people, have you got Daniel figured out? We really need to sort Daniel out. And what Daniel does, very, very interesting, what Daniel does is it launches us into the book of Revelation because of the additional information that we can overlap in the book of Daniel. And we get a much greater story when we tie in Revelation as well. But we didn't have Revelation at the time of Yeshua on the Mount of Olives when he was asked the question about his second coming. He didn't refer to it. He referred back to Daniel. And this is what we're doing. We're going back and seeing if we can see similarities. And we definitely see similarities.
Heavenly Father, we just thank you for being able to come together like this and discuss things that's going on and the things of the future and the way that we're trying to connect it to your scriptures. And it sure appears that this is unfolding right before us. And we just ask, Father, you give us clarity, wisdom, and understanding. Thank you through the name of Yeshua. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right. Well, we are in Daniel chapter 8, and I just want to pick up on our last slide from Daniel chapter 7, verse 26, just to recap that, just to bring your memories back to what we studied prior, because we're going to be jumping into the same context, and we'll be pulling from information from Daniel 7. So Daniel 7, we had 4 beasts, and we had a lion that had eagle's wings, and the eagle's wings were ripped off, so the eagle disappeared. So it was, we're suggesting that that represents the United States as the eagle and the lion as Great Britain, the bear being Russia, China as the leopard, and the dreadful beast with 10 controlling entities, 10 kings. 3 were uprooted and 7 were left over. All these numbers are very important as we move forward, especially once we get into the book of Revelation, because Revelation pulls all these chapters really together, and so we need to keep them in mind as we go forward. And then we had a 3.5-year period. Can someone tell me what the 3.5-year period pertained to? Was it the whole vision, or was it part of the vision? What was it in connection with?
With the reign of the little horn.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
good. The reign of the little horn. So the time period has to do with the little horn. Why is that? Because the little horn, it looks like Daniel's focus became the little horn. And I think the reason for that is because the little horn was the one that instigated the persecution of God's people, and then it spread throughout the world from the little horn. And the little horn influenced the rest of the kings of the earth. And it says that the little horn consumed the whole earth. In other words, it spread its ideology throughout the earth. And as it started persecuting it, the persecution spread throughout the whole earth, and God's people were persecuted. And that's why Daniel focuses in on the time period does not have to do with the length of the whole vision. It just pertains to the little horn. Why am I stressing that over and over again? Because we're going to see exactly the same thing in Daniel chapter 8. We're going to see a time period, and that time period has to do with the little horn. And somebody might say, oh, no, that prophecy is different. That time period pertains to the whole time period from the beginning of the vision, and it actually goes further. So we're going to be looking at that. And I want to do this, and we had a comment, really a good comment, observation. Why do I keep going back to the historical application? Because the reason is I use the example of money in your bank. When you just keep withdrawing money from your bank, at some point you're going to run out and you're not going to have anything left to withdraw from. This is the same thing that we have going on with these prophecies. People think they have money in the bank when it comes to explaining what these prophecies are. They think they know it all, if you will, Revelation chapter 3 type of thing. They're rich and increase with goods. Those goods are what they think is scripture truth. And so it's not until you show someone that they're actually blind and they need light actually to get into their mind. It's not until you show them that what they have, it doesn't work. And then it allows them to move forward and to something that actually does work. So I hope you're patient as I go through some of this stuff, just to demonstrate that what most people, and not just the church that I came out of, we all came out of different churches, but basically as a whole, if you came out of any ecumenical styled church, evangelical church, they look at these prophecies much the same. Where it becomes different is when the little horn comes along. There's a lot of confusion as to who the little horn is. But basically they've got Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, and then the dividing during those time periods. And so we're going to look at that briefly. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I just want to pick out a few challenges with it so people can realize, hey, they're going to have another look at this stuff, because these prophecies, I believe, are unfolding before our very eyes, and I really want to make that clear. So let's go here. So we have in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel was told, he said he got the main facts. So one of the main facts is the court was seated sometime during the reign of the little horn. So it has to happen during the 1260 days, 3.5 years, 42 months. So that's the allotted time for the little horn. And he's destroyed. We're going to see that once we get to the book of Revelation. The kings of the earth actually destroy the little horn. The little horn morphs into what is called the harlot of Revelation, chapter 17. And the kings of the earth destroy her. They finally figure out that she's only in it for herself, and this entity is nothing but evil, and the kings of the earth destroy her at that time. That's not the end of time. Yeshua does not destroy the harlot. The harlot is destroyed prior to Yeshua's coming. And so we want to look at the whys and how come it happens like that, but that's going to be a little bit down the road once we get to Revelation 17 and Revelation 13. So the important point to take away here, we have 4 kingdoms, and we have a little horn, and we have a courtroom setting in the time that the little horn is reigning. Okay. We're coming back to that once we get into Daniel chapter 8. That's why I'm bringing that up now. So Daniel chapter 7. Let's look at the commonalities between 7 and 8 before we get right into Daniel 8, so we'll know where we're going. Daniel 7, we have 4 winds striving upon the great sea of people, so there's strife in the world. And that's kind of where we're moving towards right now. And we have 4 beasts come up, and they're called 4 kingdoms. And contrary to popular belief, these beasts are contemporaries. They're all on the stage, operating at the same time. We went through that on Daniel 7. Even the terminology is very clear that these beasts are on the stage at the same time. The ram and the he-goat from Daniel chapter 8 is the first thing we see, and then we see the 4 winds. So I'm proposing that the visions are exactly the same, but we have the preliminary thing going on with the ram and the goat. There's going to be a war. And this war actually is announcing that we're marching into the very end of time when the 4 winds are going to be let loose. So God in his infinite mercy has told us the chapter 1 of the time of the end. And chapter 1 is a war between the ram and the he-goat. And then once we get the ram and the he-goat over with, then we have 4 horns, which are 4 kingdoms. We're told that they're 4 kingdoms. And we can see here now that we're perfectly going to parallel Daniel chapter 7. So the 4 beasts are equal to the 4 horns. The historical application of this prophecy is different. They make the 4 horns representing something else besides the 4 beasts. We're not going to go there. We're just going to look at this and see what the prophecy says so that we can know that these are equal. The 4 beasts equal the 4 horns. From Daniel chapter 7, the 4 beasts are represented as 4 horns in Daniel chapter 8. And then we had a little horn that persecutes and changes times and laws. So those are, let's remember now that this prophecy that Daniel 7, when he opened, he said he's going to tell us the main facts. In other words, he's telling us the most important things. Probably not everything that he saw, but the main facts, kind of like what we're doing, trying to look at the main facts so that we can make comparisons to the other chapters and see that these main facts overlap into the other prophecies, which I think it's very clear that we can see overlap already. So we see a little horn, persecution, changing times and laws. We can't miss this changing of times and laws. It's not got to do with, changing your clock because it's daylight saving time. This is not what we're talking about here. These are talking about God's times. To be exact, God's appointed times. And the wording from Daniel chapter 7 is written in Chaldee, the ancient Chaldean language. And when we take that word, it actually means appointed times. That's in Daniel 7:25. And he's going to change God's appointed times. And we can see clearly today, nobody hardly is keeping God's appointed times. So this change took place quite a long time ago. However, Israel, at least some in Israel, the Orthodox, they keep these same times as well. So this changing of times that has happened in history that most people have accepted, the changing of the times for God's people and those that want to keep it will be law at some point. And this is another reason why we're looking at this prophecy as being in the future, because the changing of times and laws as far as God's timing is concerned has not actually been made into law as in a worldwide event. And the law there is the Torah, of course. So he's changing times and laws, and they can be found in the Torah itself. So the little horn's going to do this, and once he consumes the whole earth, he will put his times and laws in the place of God's times and laws. And it tells us in Daniel chapter 7 that he consumes the whole earth. In other words, he ends up controlling the whole world. And this is when the real persecution, the time of trouble that's never was since there was a nation, this time of persecution. And he reigns, as we saw, times and half a time, 3.5 times, or Revelation, we see 3 times. We see this time period as time times and a half in chapter 12. And we also see it as 1,260 days in chapter 12 as well in Revelation. And we see this 42 months. We see that in Revelation 13 and Revelation 11 as well. So we see this same time period pop up again with this same entity, this mouth that speaks great things. We see this persecuting power alive and well in Revelation, same time period. And that's when the mark of the beast is. And so what I'm suggesting, just flat out, no qualms about it here, is the time times and a half is happening on the earth when the mark of the beast is being enforced. This is the time period that the little horn is reigning. This is another evidence, as far as I'm concerned, that this prophecy has not been applied in history. Revelation 13 talks about 42 months. It also talks about the mark of the beast. So we know that the mark of the beast is happening during the time frame of this time times and a half and the 42 months, 1,260 days. So that's another indication that this is going to happen in the future. So in Daniel 8, we see the little horn and persecution. This time it says it takes away the daily. And I would propose, as we're gonna see, that the daily has everything to do with the changing of times and laws. And so the little horn, we see the parallel with the little horn. We see the persecution. We see the changing of times and laws in Daniel 7. In Daniel 8, it gets into being very specific. So I would propose that the daily is part of God's calendar, part of his appointed time calendar. We need to remember that this word is the same word in Numbers chapter 28 when it talks about the different sacrifices they were supposed to make during God's appointed times. And the daily is the very first one, and there was a morning and evening. So we can see here that the little horn, the changing of the times and laws, the first thing he's going to do is take away the daily, and that is really the foundation of God's appointed times. It's the daily appointed time that God has, the time of the daily sacrifice in the morning and the daily sacrifice in the afternoon. So we see here this little horn in Daniel chapter 8 goes to the glorious land. And this is his final destination, and I would propose that that's going to be his resting place when the 10 horns destroy the little horn. In Revelation, we see that again in Revelation 17. So the time frame we have here in Daniel chapter 8 is the 2,300 evenings and mornings. It says the 2,300 days in most translations, but the actual word is not days, not as it is in Daniel chapter 12, where it says 1,290 days and 1,335 days. It is 2,300 evenings and mornings here, and it's been assumed in the past that this is talking about a 24-hour period, but it isn't in the context. It's clearly not talking about a 24-hour period. It's talking about 2,300 evening and morning sanctuary time. So that time period, as well as we're going to see, has only to do with the little horn. The 2,300 evenings and mornings is an answer to a question of how long the little horn is going to do its dirty work. And we're going to see that. And this is in keeping consistent, actually, with Daniel chapter 7. When Daniel focuses in on the little horn, he does exactly the same thing in Daniel chapter 8. He's told of the time period that the little horn will reign. In Daniel chapter 8, he's wondering about the little horn. The question is asked, how long? The answer comes back, 2,300 evenings and mornings. So there's something going to happen at the 2300 evening and morning time period during the little horn's reign. And this is what we want to nail down today. So we saw that judgment is during the little horn's reign, during the time frame of 3.5 years. And so judgment has to happen within that time period. Well, lo and behold, in Daniel chapter 8, we move to judgment again. So you can see here, you know, I'm just not bringing words on the screen. These words are taken directly out of both of these chapters. And so I think it's very evident that we have exactly the same story. We don't have two judgments going on in this world. There is one judgment that is just in front of us, and these two prophecies are making it very clear when this judgment happens. God wants us to know when the judgment will happen. So we have a war, then we have a division of the kingdoms of the earth. We have a little horn come out of that. We're going to have persecution, which is the time frame of the mark of the beast. And the question is asked, how long will this happen for? And the answer is that judgment will take place at 2300 evenings and mornings from the starting point, which is the time frame of the daily being taken away. So we can start to build a timeline here, which we're going to as we go down the road here a little bit. So now I want to go to combine Daniel 7 and 8 a little bit together. And we have a ram and a goat war. And then we have four winds striving on the sea. So we can see after this war, obviously we're going to have strife going into the war. And then there will be strife on the other side of the war. And it will be between the four beasts, or four horns, or four kingdoms, the four remaining kingdoms of the UN Security Council member. Remember, we had the United States, Great Britain, Russia, China, and France, all these being the main powers, the Allied powers on the Second World War. They formed what came to be as the UN, and they set themselves up as what has been called the permanent members of the Security Council. That means they never go away. They're not voted in. They're not voted out. They're the ones that really control everything that happens in the world. And the eagle's wings is going to be ripped out of there, and there will only be four remaining ones. And I find it very interesting that the way the world system is set up is exactly the way these prophecies go. And I had someone, just throw this in here, I had someone talking to someone else, I found out kind of through the grapevine, that they were told not to listen to my explanation of these prophecies because he really makes it look like these prophecies are what's going on in the world today. And I just thought, wow, you just need to think about what you just said here. And I find that quite interesting. You know, people that want to deny moving forward, they will come up with all kinds of reasons why they can't move forward. Why not just be objective, look at it, see what we can see, and go with it if it makes more sense than what we already have accepted as to what we think is truth. So we see here Daniel chapter 7 and 8 both have this little horn, persecutes, takes away the daily. So we can see all these things. And also the little horn I take from Daniel 8, it moves into the glorious land. And so this is where it's going. And the glorious land, you might think where you live is the glorious land. But actually, when the Bible talks about the glorious land, it's talking about the Middle East, specifically where Israel is. The land of Israel, the glorious land, and Jerusalem, to be exact. This little horn power, there's something going on at the 2300 evenings and mornings. And we're told it's judgment. So judgment will happen during this time frame that the little horn is doing its thing. and the little horn has a total time period of time times and a half. So we've combined both these chapters, taken the difference, little bit of the different information that they have, combined them together, and we can see a better picture. So this is a kind of a demonstration. If we could gather all the prophecies that are the same, that are talking about the same time frame, they're all a little bit of different information. So if we could gather all those different prophecies and put them together, we can see that we could fill in a lot of gaps. And this is the problem that people have today. They like to study the book of Revelation, but they forget that the book of Daniel, it really is the foundation. So if you don't have the foundation in the book of Daniel to see the starting place of all these events, then you almost have no business looking at the book of Revelation. And I tell people when they're telling me, oh, they're studying Revelation, they're trying to figure out Revelation, I always ask them, well, how are you doing with Daniel? Oh, that's already in the past. We don't need to worry about that. Oh, boy, there's your first mistake right there. So we need to take what we see in Daniel and move it forward into the New Testament. And so this is what we're going to do here with Matthew 24 and Mark 13 is there as well. But it's pretty much carbon copy with Matthew 24. So we won't look at that as much as we will Luke. So Matthew and Luke in chapter 24 of Matthew and Luke 21, that's the question that Yeshua was asked. What is the sign of your coming in the end of the age? So if he's telling us things that are going to happen at the end of the world, and we're saying that Daniel 7 and Daniel 8 are also events at the end of the world, should we not be able to find some similarities between the book of Daniel, these chapters of the time of the end, and what Yeshua said about the time of the end? Absolutely, we should be able to see some similarities. Let's look briefly here. When Yeshua was asked about the time of the end, the very first thing he said, he talked about deception. So that's the most important thing. So in the time of the end, our first and foremost thing that we should have in our mind is we don't want to be deceived. That was the very first thing. Do not be deceived. So that tells me that deception will be rampant everywhere, even in the church, because that's who he's talking to. He's talking to followers of him. Don't be deceived. Who are they going to be deceived by? I'm not going to be deceived by, well, I could put some names up here, but I'm not going to be deceived by people in the world, per se. I'm going to be deceived by someone I watch on YouTube that's trying to tell me what these prophecies mean, or maybe that Sunday's done away with, and the feasts are at this date or that date, or there's just so many people out there that I might fall prey to that are actually masquerading as teaching truth. And most of these people that are doing this are thinking they're teaching truth. Most of them, I would say, are thinking they're teaching truth. They've accepted a truth, and so they go and teaching it, just much like what I'm doing. I think what I'm teaching is truth. Time is going to tell whether it's true or not, but I think if it makes sense, and it makes sense in the Word, and it makes sense in the world, then there's a good possibility that we could have something here. So Yeshua, the next thing he talks about, which is the first event of his discussion in Matthew 24 of the time of the end, he says war. So I find that interesting because that's exactly the prelude that we see in Daniel chapter 8, in the chapter that declares itself to be at the time of the end. And so he starts at the same time frame. And then he says what's going to happen after that is famine. Well, it's very interesting. A war of the magnitude that this war is going to be. It's going to involve the whole world. It's going to involve the shipping lanes, the transportation, all of these things. I believe, my personal belief is is that the United States and Canada will become a third world nation after this war. This seems to be what the prophecies are indicating. And that would mean we're going to go hungry. And I would say with what's going to be going on in the rest of the world, they're going to go hungry as well. So the famine is a result of the magnitude of the war. This should be a warning to all of us as we see this war approaching. We might want to put a few things on our storehouse to get through these little bumps in the road. Did I say little bumps? Big bumps in the road. And famine will be the first one that comes. And this is a cause and effect. So the cause of the famine was the war that preceded it. So now we have pestilence. Okay, well, the pestilence here is a cause and effect as well. The war is going to bring suffering. The war is going to bring famine. And what follows this kind of suffering would be pestilence. So disease is going to be in the land. And we're not talking about just in part of the world. This isn't going to be something that's going on in Africa this time. This is coming home to all of us. And if we look out there in the world and see what's happened with migration, as we're going to get into a little more, we'll talk more about that, is we're seeing the setting for what is going to be a war unlike any other war. This war is coming home to everyone's neighborhood. So, and we're going to get into that a little bit. So pestilence is going to follow. And then if that wasn't enough, Yeshua threw earthquakes into there too. He talked about a time of trouble such as there never was since there was a nation. And it's interesting that Yeshua quotes it verbatim right out of the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 12. So Yeshua was thinking about Daniel chapter 12 when he was explaining the time of the end. So that should tell us that if we want to know about the time of the end, we got to go back to Daniel. Let's remember the book of Revelation was not written yet. So all Yeshua had for the time of the end was the book of Daniel, and that's what he points forward to, or points back to. And so this is the time of trouble, quoting Daniel, and we're going to see also he quotes Daniel twice in Matthew 24 and Luke 21. So we know that he's focused back into the book of Daniel for the time of the end. He talks about persecution. So we can see here again, the time of the end, there's going to be this great persecution. We can know some more information about that persecution. We know it's going to be the little horn. We know the time frame. So when we put these prophecies together, we piggyback them, we get more information about what's going to be going on. And it's not enough to know Daniel 7 and Daniel 8 that there's a war and it's not going to be pretty and there's going to be persecution that follows. But isn't it kind of nice that we know that after this war there's going to be famine? So that Yeshua is trying to tell us something. He's trying to tell us that we need to prepare for what's coming. That's why God gives these prophecies, so that we can prepare. We can be prepared first and foremost spiritually. Mentally, we're going to have to be mentally prepared for what's coming. And we're going to have to be physically prepared for what's coming. And this is, to me, people are really scared of these prophecies. But what it is to me is there's a loving God out there that we're going to meet face to face one day. But he's telling us in advance what's coming so we can be ready. This is a loving God. These prophecies really speak of God's love and warning to not only the whole earth, but especially to God's people. Because if they're listening to him, listening to his voice, and doing what they should be, searching his word, as it was for our bread and water, if we're searching that, we not only know the truth for ourselves, but we can share it with others too. I was talking to some people one time and sharing these prophecies with a fairly large group actually, and someone interrupted and said, well, why why are you sharing this? Because it really doesn't matter to us because, we're going to be raptured. And I just thought, oh, my, really? So you're going to be raptured. That's one thing. If you believe you're going to be raptured, that's, if you want to believe that, that's fine. I don't see that in the Bible, but if you think it doesn't matter, these prophecies don't matter because you're going to be raptured, you're going to be out of here, why not learn about these prophecies so you can maybe talk to your neighbor or somebody, a friend, and you can warn him what's coming so that maybe he could get ready to be raptured too. Does that make sense to you guys? But my personal opinion, just so no one walks away thinking that I believe in the rapture, there is going to be a rapture, but it's when Yeshua returns, not before. That wouldn't be consistent with the way God has operated in the past. He's never taken his people out of this world prematurely. It's never been done. He's always been there in the storm to go through their time of trouble to get them to the other side. And this is what we've been promised. Yeshua said, I will be with you to the end of the age. He doesn't say, I'll be with you till the rapture and then we're out of here. No, he said to the end of the age. And people say, well, it's a secret rapture. Yeah, it's so secret that Yeshua forgot to mention it. It's just not in the Bible. The verses that are used in the Bible for the secret rapture, they are not there. And that's just how secret it is. So we see we have persecution. We have Jerusalem mentioned by Yeshua. He talks about the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. And he was up on the Mount of Olives. And from his vantage point, they would have been looking down at the temple. And it would be very fitting for him to talk about the holy place. They all would have known what he was talking about. He was talking about a temple down there. And this little horn we saw in Daniel is going to end up in Jerusalem. So that Jerusalem becomes the focal point at the time of the end. No wonder what we see going on in the world, Jerusalem seems to be at the focal point. Anyone listening to the news these days? It's pretty wild what's going on over there, especially just the last few days. Kind of unreal what's happening. It's going to escalate. It's going to continue to escalate the closer we get to the time of the end, especially to the time of this war, because this war is focusing on the Holy Land of Israel with all the Muslim nations around there. That's what this war is going to be focused on. And this war, because Islam has now been spread throughout the world with this great migration, they're getting all in place for the time when they get the go-ahead for their final jihad in the world. And that's what this war is talking about. So here we see again in Matthew 24, he's focused on the time of the end. Jerusalem comes into focus and all these other events. He speaks about the abomination of desolation spoken of by Ezekiel the prophet. Is that what he said? No. The abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. I really like this on two counts. Here he nails the prophecy. Got to go back to Daniel. If this abomination of desolation is back in Daniel, then we better start back in Daniel. That's the very first prophecy. I kind of say things sometimes that gets me into trouble. But I'm suggesting quite strongly here that unless we have Daniel all figured out for the time of the end, we don't have a lot of business looking at other prophecies. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. And I'm not saying that we discard those prophecies. But when Yeshua was asked a specific question, what are the signs of your coming and the end of the age? He points us back to Daniel. You know, if we're followers of Yeshua, we really need to go in the direction that he points us. And that's to Daniel. I keep telling people, have you got Daniel figured out? We really need to sort Daniel out. And what Daniel does, very, very interesting, what Daniel does is it launches us into the book of Revelation because of the additional information that we can overlap in the book of Daniel. And we get a much greater story when we tie in Revelation as well. But we didn't have Revelation at the time of Yeshua on the Mount of Olives when he was asked the question about his second coming. He didn't refer to it. He referred back to Daniel. And this is what we're doing. We're going back and seeing if we can see similarities. And we definitely see similarities. We see a time of trouble that Yeshua spoke about, time of trouble such as there never was, and that is taken right out of Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. That's what it's talking about, a time of trouble such as there never was since there was a nation. And I believe, my personal belief here, is that time of trouble such as there never was culminates in the 7 last plagues. We have 7 trumpets. We have 7 last plagues, and the 7 last plagues are poured out on the wicked. That is their reward just prior to Yeshua's second coming. That will happen, and that'll be the final act of God's wrath being poured out at the time that Yeshua, just prior to his coming. And then we have the second coming, which is exactly what we see in Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8. So we see they culminate at the same time. So I think it's pretty obvious that Daniel chapter 7 and 8 are really the basis for Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. So there's different views of looking at this. The preterist view will take all of this and say that all happened in the past. And we don't have really much of anything to look forward to. And then you have the historicist view, is that most of this happened in the past. Most of the things that we see on the screen right now happened in the past. And then you have what I believe is I'm a historicist / futurist. So in other words, I believe that these prophecies were applied in the past. There are prophecies in the Bible that happened in the past, so that's the historicist view. But I don't believe all the prophecies happened in the past. I believe Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8, Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, for the bulk of them, their future. In fact, I'm not setting these way out in the future. We are about to have these prophecies bust wide open very, very soon. I really believe that this war, this Ram and he goat war, will happen within, not outside 2 years. And I've got several reasons which we won't get into now. But we are knocking on the door of this war. We can see this intensifying as we go. So Matthew 24, the reason why it came to be was very, very interesting. It was a question. And we see in the New Testament, when Yeshua is asked a question, he gives the answer. And a lot of the New Testament is the result of a question that was asked of Yeshua. And I can only imagine that he was waiting for his disciples to ask the question. And it's very interesting because he led them right into the question. This is a little lesson for us. He led them right into this question. When the disciples and Yeshua were walking through the temple, prior to going up on the Mount of Olives, they were showing him how beautiful the temple was, how well it was decorated with all these beautiful stones. And he said to them, in his lead up to their question about his coming, he said, well, I want to tell you, there's not going to be one stone left upon another. And if you walk through that temple in his day, I've seen pictures of what it probably looked like in the massive stones. He said that not one stone would be left upon another. And all they could think of is, when could that possibly happen? And all the way up to the Mount of Olives, as they're going up there, they're arguing amongst themselves of what in the world is Yeshua talking about. So once they got up there, it was agreed by the 12 that 4 of his closest followers, that would be James and John, Peter and Andrew, the 2 sets of brothers, would go to Yeshua and they would ask him privately, what are you talking about here? What are the signs of your coming in the end of the age? And that's why we have that. But the lesson for us is, when we're trying to witness, when we're trying to get people to ask the right question, give them something to feed on. Give them a lead to ask the question. And that's what I try and do with people, is give them a lead. Be bold and say something that will prompt a question. If they don't ask the question, they're probably not interested. So a lot of times you don't have to do anything, but go out there, go outside of your comfort zone and start talking to people. You don't have to give them bottom lines, but just lead them into some kind of discussion. That's what Yeshua did all the time. Daniel chapter 7, or Daniel chapter 8, verses 17 and 19, it says, so he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, Son of Man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. So this is exactly the same kind of language when Yeshua is asked, what is the sign of your coming in the end of the age? Well, he goes through and gives us events that tie into the book of Daniel. And we can see from the book of Daniel, he's telling us the same thing. And he said, look, I'm making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation, for at the appointed time the end shall be. What is the sign of your coming? And the end of the age. Same discussion that we have going on here. So now let's jump into chapter 8 of Daniel. We're going to go through here verse by verse so that we don't get lost, and that all I'm saying we'll be able to prove as we're reading through. So Daniel chapter 8, verse 1 and 2. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. I'm going to hammer on this right here. The very opening verse. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. So can anyone tell me which vision was Daniel's first vision?
Chapter 7.
Nice. That was a very difficult. You're only going to get 1 point for that one because that was pretty easy, wasn't it? So who was it that gave him the understanding of that chapter?
Gabriel.
Nice. That's worth 2 points. That's a good one. Okay, so you got 2 points for that. So Gabriel came to Daniel in the first vision that he had, and that was Daniel chapter 7. I want you to grab your Bibles here because this is important. When we get to Daniel 9, it's something very interesting. Daniel chapter 9, verse 21. It says, yes, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, notice it doesn't say the angel Gabriel, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, reached me about the time of the evening offering. So what is the evening offering? That's one of the moeds, right? That's the morning and the evening. Okay, so we can see this. there's some things going on in Daniel's visions that are very similar. So here we have Gabriel again. And we see Gabriel is mentioned in Daniel 8 by name. We don't have Gabriel by name in Daniel chapter 7, but we do know that there were some beings that were standing by that gave him the understanding of the vision. And so this one says that Gabriel, he saw Gabriel in the vision at the beginning. Now this word beginning, you might want to circle it there. And it's the same word that you have in verse 23. That word beginning, it's the same Hebrew word. Now, when we go back to Daniel chapter 8, which is what we're looking at here, it says that appeared to me the first time. That little phrase, the first time, is the same Hebrew word at the beginning. Okay? So my point here is, Daniel chapter 9 is referencing Gabriel and says that he saw him in the vision at the beginning. The vision at the beginning was Daniel 7. So he identifies, very interesting, Daniel in chapter 9 identifies now Gabriel, whom he had seen in chapter 7. It's not necessarily a link to chapter 8, although it is, because the same being was there to show him the vision. But he's referencing in Daniel chapter 9 the first vision. That was the vision at the beginning, and Daniel makes that very clear in Daniel chapter 8, the vision that appeared to him the first time, or at the beginning. Okay, so now we have some continuity between these visions. I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking that I was in Shushan, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai. So we need to see where this is. This is this river Ulai. It's believed that it's in southwestern Iran, and it goes into the Euphrates when the Euphrates and the Tigris come together, and they go into the Persian Gulf. The river Ulai joins those, and they go into the Persian Gulf at its mouth, and actually at the head of the Persian Gulf, where it is with Iraq and Iran, and Kuwait is also there. So then that's where he saw this vision appear. So there's the spot on the map that he sees in vision. Then I lifted my eyes and saw there, standing beside the river, was a ram that had two horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. Now we're going to find out who these two horns represent, and we're told, as we're going to get closer, they are the kings of Media and Persia. So something interesting that we don't want to miss here as we move forward. Horns don't just come out of midair. You don't see horns. Has anyone seen a horn just sort of walking along the ground or flying in the midst of the wind? No, horns are attached to animals. That's what horns are attached to. And the prophecy is very clear. You cannot have a horn outside of an animal. This is going to become very important as we try and get to the bottom of some of these prophecies. So we have here these two horns. One was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. And then it controls the ram. So the ram is a larger entity. The horns, we're told, are the kings of Media and Persia. And we're going to zero in on where the kings of Media and Persia are today, because if this prophecy is in the time of the end, it should make sense for us here at the time of the end. So Daniel was told that the two horns that really control the beast, that's what the horns represent in prophecy. They are the ones that do the controlling of the larger body in the animal. They steer it, if you will. And that's what we see going on here. So the higher one, these details are very important. The higher one came up last. Goes on to say in verse 4, I saw the ram pushing northward and southward, or westward was the first direction, northward and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand. But he did according to his will, and he became great. Now, what is pushing? The ram is pushing. The horns are the kings, we're told, of the kings of Media and Persia. So these empires that make up the horns are directing traffic of all those that are in the ram. And I believe, as we're going to see, is the ram represents all of Islam. So all of Islam is going to push west first. This we can see what is going on right now. They are pushing west. Islam is pushing westward. They've gone into Europe. They've gone into the United States, into Canada as well. Anyone that's got their eyes open when they go into cities, everyone that I'm talking to is saying, wow, you know, I've seen a lot more Muslim-looking people when I go into town these days. And this is because there are tens of thousands of these Muslims coming in here. And I want to say right now is I'm not prejudiced against these people. I just happen to know what they believe. I understand their ideology. The ideology of Islam is that Islam will rule the world one day. They basically have the same concept that Christianity has. Yeshua said, go into all the world, teaching all nations things that I've commanded you. And this is exactly what Islam is doing. They're going into all nations, teaching things that they have been commanded. They believe that they want the whole world to accept Sharia law. Now, if we compare this to the commandment that Yeshua gave us, go into all the world, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. What did Yeshua command us? Well, if we dig a little deeper, we can see that it was Yeshua up on Mount Sinai that gave the Torah to his people and to Moses, and then they took that law and he gave it to the people. They accepted it. This is what Yeshua was talking about in Matthew 24. Go and teach all nations this. Islam is doing exactly the same thing. They have the same mandate from their God, Allah, and they're going into all the world, teaching all nations things that they have been commanded, and they want everyone to accept Sharia law. They have a different way of getting their job done than most Christians do. They can use force and they can push their religion on other people, something that we should not do. Our God is a polite God. He won't force anyone to do anything. He pleads with them. Why will you die? He says to us. So he's pleading with us to come forward, but Sharia law and the way of Islam is to force, and that's what they're going to do. They're going to try and force the whole world in this final jihad that they're going to have. And this is what Daniel is shown in Daniel chapter 8. The kings of Media Persia are in control of all of Islam, and all of Islam is going to go west, which we can see clearly. That's the first direction. They're going to go north into Russia, and once they start moving northward and southward, and they're going to be a threat to the whole world. And that's when the whole world will actually join forces, because they will have a common enemy in Islam. China is not going to accept Sharia law, and Russia is not going to accept Sharia law for all of its citizens, and neither is the West in Europe, England, and the United States and Canada. They accept them to come in, but they are not going to accept their ways. It's just not going to happen. And it will be forced. There will be a war that will come to pass, because Islam is going to pull the trigger on this. And it won't be that far down the road. So this Islam becomes very, very influential in the world, very powerful in the world, and they will do whatever they want to do, and no one will be brave enough to stop them until they do something and cross the line, and then they will be stopped. And this is what the prophecy indicates. They became great. Daniel chapter 8, verse 5 goes on to say, "And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat, which is the greater body, where there's horns, we're going to see horns attached here, but there is a large body being the UN. The Western-styled nations of the UN are going to come from the West, and I find it very interesting that in New York is where the UN headquarters was after the Second World War. Of course, there is a UN headquarters in Europe as well. But they came, it says here, they came from the West. The West is going to be the one directing traffic, and that's why it's mentioned here. They're going to be the lead on this. Whoops, let's go back there. It says that they came across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between its eyes. Here again, if we're talking about the end of time here, we know how big the world is, and it says across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. And I want to go back to how this has been applied in prophecy just a little bit. In times past, the application of this prophecy has been for Alexander the Great. Now, if you look at where Alexander the Great came out of the empire, the Grecian Empire, it's hardly across the surface of the whole earth. And there's all kinds of ideas that people make up because they have to make up something, because it certainly isn't across the surface of the whole earth. Greece is just part way through the Mediterranean, and so it does not fulfill the specifications in the prophecy. And it says it does it without touching the ground. Well, if you came from the west across the surface of the whole earth, you could not get to the Middle East, you couldn't get to the river Ulai unless you did not touch the ground. You would have to come either by air or by sea. So clearly, as we're looking at these prophecies, we can see that maybe in the time of the end, we have a better fit for the specifications in the prophecies than in the time of the past. And that's what we're looking at. We're not trying to declare that those that believe the historical application are evil. We're just saying, hey, that's a pretty good fit, but it doesn't really fit all the specifications. So we're looking for something that fits a little bit better. And as we go through, we look at these prophecies, look at all the specifications, every detail, and we say, hey, how does this fit in the world today? And lo and behold, it fits pretty darn good. And so we're going with what fits a little bit better. So it says without touching the ground. So it comes across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat, so the larger body, had a notable horn. So here again, keeping consistent with prophecy, a notable horn is the main power. It's the first king. It's the dominant king on this beast. And it's very interesting that it says it's a notable horn. I want to make a point here with the word notable horn. The word notable is a comparative figure, a comparative word. So if I have, you see these, let me get this up here so you can see them. How many oranges do I have here?
You have 5.
I got
Four
5.
large.
Do you happen to see the notable orange?
Right in the middle.
How did you determine it was notable?
It was big, large.
Yeah, it was like different from the other ones, wasn't it? This is what we've got in this term, and this becomes very clear as we look at this. These horns are together on the animal all at the same time, and I really want to stress this, is so that we have the West, The UN is the larger body that's made up of many nations, many horns, really, but many nations, because nations are kingdoms in prophecy, and so we have these horns. So we have here a clear picture of a larger beast, so a larger body, which I'm suggesting is the UN, that's governed by 5 main horns, or 5 main kingdoms. That would be the United States, that would be Great Britain, that would be France, Russia, and China. Those are the 5 dominant kingdoms in the world. They're called the permanent members of the Security Council. Every decision that goes on in the world has to be okayed by these 5 kingdoms. They basically lead the way in this world. And again, it's because they were the allies in the Second World War, and when they started the UN, they made sure that they would never be voted out of this thing. It's like their president forever. And so that's what they did. That's the way the UN was formed. So they have a notable horn or a notable king that directs traffic in the UN. Is there a notable horn or a notable kingdom in the world? What would you say it was? Now, that's kind of called into question, but for the last 30 or 40 years, what has been the notable kingdom in the world?
The United States.
The United States. I don't think anyone would argue with that. So here we have the United States leading the charge against Islam. Can anyone think of any reason why the United States would lead a charge against Islam? Well, let me throw a couple ideas out here. The United States is called the Great Satan with Islam. And Israel's called the Little Satan. So they're both enemies. They're the primary enemies. And it's very clear. Everyone knows that. And so the West has been the target, really the target with Islam. And it's going to get worse, and it's going to escalate. And I believe that something is going to happen in Israel and in the United States that will really break the camel's back here, and they will come charging against Islam. And this is the picture that we see in the prophecies, that the notable horn leads the way. And the United States and Israel have been the main targets with Islam. We all know that. And the United States and Israel are very closely allied. We all know that. And so this is what's going to happen. We know from Luke, Yeshua said, when you see Israel surrounded by armies, well, he's kind of pointing at that thing. That's Luke 21. We can see that that Israel is going to be the focal point, and this is what I believe is the catalyst that joins all these nations together. Is Islam lets loose on the whole world, but primarily with Israel and the United States. So the United States is going to lead the charge against Islam, which is governed really by the kings of Media and Persia. So it has a notable horn in comparison to other horns, and we're going to see that here. Then the goat came to the ram, Islam, that had 2 horns, the kings of Media and Persia, that are directing the ram, the greater body, which is Islam, which I'd seen standing beside the river, and ran at him, or the ram, with furious power. Now, the same old thing. When somebody charges you with furious power, then you've done something to provoke anger. It says in another translation, it says with choler, which is an old English term. That's like the worst kind of anger you can get. Something has prompted the ram, or the goat, to attack this ram with fury, and he unleashes everything on this ram. And I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke his 2 horns. So the controlling power of the ram now has been broken. There was no power in the ram to withstand him. So the ram couldn't do anything about it. Once the 2 horns were broken, the ram couldn't do anything because that's where its power was. But he cast him to the ground. The goat cast him to the ground and trampled him. So not just the 2 horns now. The 2 horns are broken off, and now he tramples the ram. So Islam is going to be completely wiped out as a religion. And there's a lot of people thinking that Islam is going to, Chrislam, and Islam is going to be where the Antichrist comes out of. If we would read the prophecies, we would see that Islam is going to be annihilated by the United States and the rest of the nations in the world, because Islam has made its move, its final jihad, against all the nations of the world, because they believe that they need to take the war to the world and defeat all those that will not submit to Allah. And that's what they're going to do. And the world's not going to sit and let them do that. They're going to come out with both barrels blazing, so to speak. And they're going to totally destroy Islam. So Islam is going to be destroyed, and now we get to see what's going to happen after that. Goes on to say, therefore the male goat, which is the UN body, which primarily is made up of those 5 kingdoms, they grew very great. Why is this? The UN grows very great, very powerful with these 5 leading members. It grows very powerful because now there are no kingdoms that can be of any threat to the world peace, because they've all joined together in this war. So China, Russia, Europe, Great Britain, and the United States have all worked together to defeat the greatest threat in this world for world peace, and now it's out of the way. So the UN becomes very, very strong after this war. There is no one that can come against it at this point. But when the goat, so when the UN became very great, it says the large horn was broken. So if the large horn is the United States and it's the eagle's wing, so the notable horn representing the United States, same as the eagle's wings in Daniel chapter 7, the eagle's wings were plucked off and the large horn was broken from the UN, or the goat body. And in place of it, 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. Notice it says 4 notable ones came up. Now that the United States is broken, the notable one, we have 4 notable ones come up. Exactly the way the structure is in this world. We would have, if the United States went down, we would now only have 4 notable kingdoms that would control the world. Exactly the structure of the UN today. In place of it, 4 notable ones. These would be the 4 major kingdoms. They would be the notable kingdoms in the world. Instead of 5, right now, the eagle being taken out, we would only have 4. And this is exactly what we see in Daniel chapter 7, and this is the same thing that we're seeing here in Daniel chapter 8. It says that they came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. And this is exactly what we see in Daniel chapter 7. We see 4 beasts come up from the 4 winds of heaven. We see exactly the same story. God is giving us more information on what's going on. So we see the lion as Great Britain, we see Russia as the bear, China as the leopard, and the European Union, the dreadful beast, and this is where the little horn comes up out of. So we see the same thing going on. We've got exactly the same story as we see in Daniel chapter 7. Now, right here we see something we see out of one of them came the little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, toward the glorious land. Now let me ask you a question. Who is them? Out of one of them. Can somebody tell me out of one of them? What is the them?
One of the four.
One of the four what?
Those four nations, lion, bear, leopard, beast, they're going to come out of there.
Okay, but that's I'm tying in Daniel 7, which is good. You got the right answer there. But specifically, this is Daniel 8 now, and we have four winds and we have four horns. Let's just move back here for a second. It says that the horn was broken, the large horn was broken, and in place of it, in place of what?
Notable horn.
In place of the notable horn, right. So let's just be consistent here. I'm just trying to demonstrate something here. So instead of the notable horn being number one, now we have four notable ones. Are these horns flying around in midair? Where are they anyways?
On bodies, animals.
Right, they're on bodies. So the goat power is still alive. The larger body is still alive. These kingdoms are coming out of this larger body. They're not coming out of thin air. The goat isn't over here and the horns are not over here. The horns are attached to the body. That means that the body is still alive when the horns come up. So the greater body of the goat is around when we have the notable horn. The notable horn's broken off the goat, and we have four horns come up from the goat. That means that the goat has to be alive and kicking in order for those four horns to be doing their work. It's just the way it works. The horns are attached to a living body, so the goat is still intact and working. Then it says, out of one of them. So specifically now, out of one of what?
Out of the dreadful beast.
Out of the four?
Okay, good. Out of the four what?
The four that were left after the notable horn was broke.
Okay,
And what was left?
I know you know
So
what
the
the answer
goat?
is, but I want you to say it. Out of one of what? What are those that they came out of? What are they?
Well, they're kingdoms, they're nations,
Right.
people.
Right, but they're horns.
They're horns.
You just didn't say horns, but that's what you meant, right? Out of
Right.
one of the horns. Okay? This is a major point. It's not out of one of the four winds. It's out of the four horns. Out of one of the four horns came a little horn. I make this point because the historical application of this prophecies has horns flying around in midair that aren't attached to animals. The idea is this is where the prophecy kind of goes sideways in the historical application, because the little horn becomes a mystery. Nobody knows who the little horn is, or people don't want to say who the little horn is. I'm not sure what the problem is, but it seems to be this is where the prophecy becomes a mystery in people's minds. So what we've got here so far in the prophecy, we've got a male goat. That's the greater kingdom. That's the amalgamation of a bunch of kingdoms together, which is exactly what the UN is. It's a body of nations. We've got a large horn controlling that body, primarily, a notable kingdom. And we've got four other kingdoms that are notable, but not quite as notable as this large horn. But when the large horn is broken, these ones come up, basically take the place of this. So we are going to see, after the notable horn is broken, nature never loves a vacuum, and so there's going to be strife in the world after this war because one of these powers wants to be number one king. What we see in Daniel chapter 7 is we see a bear. Once the wings are plucked off, that's the United States, that's the notable horn, it says it has 3 ribs in its mouth, and it's told by an entity to rise and devour much flesh. When we get to the third beast, that's the leopard, it says dominion is given to it. And so when the United States goes down, China will have world dominance. That's kind of a scary idea, but that's logical. Who else would be the number one kingdom in the world once the United States goes down? It's no coincidence that these prophecies are exactly what we can see that's coming in the world. Yes, yes.
Just going to go back a little bit. It seems to me, I know that, the U.S. and the other 4 of the United Nations, seems to me the U.S. is the only one that's going to do the battle, actually. As if the other ones, they probably might say they're supporting it, but I don't see them really in this doing anything, physical. Or maybe they're part of it, but they don't really want to do anything. So the U.S. just says, all right, I don't care, we're just doing it ourselves. That could be a possibility that could happen the way this is reading, because it keeps emphasizing the large horn.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But these other horns are with it, and that's the greater body is with it. And I think the reason is because Islam wants to take over the whole world, and when they make their move, they're going to move in all directions. Like it says, it goes westward, northward, and southward. So it's going to expand its movement all over the world. And this is when the other nations, they will have to do battle as well. I understand that Moscow has approximately 2 million Muslim migrants that work in Moscow. Now, don't quote me on that, but it's a lot, and they're spread over a larger area. China has had its problems with Muslims, and so the whole world is going to be, when it's go time, and it's not go time all at once. They're pushing westward, it says first, then they're going to go north, and then southward. And Indonesia, there's a lot of largest Muslim population in the world, I believe, in Indonesia. So that's kind of in China's grasp as well, and the Philippines and other nations as well. So yeah, I think when the reality comes, the other nations are going to be forced to be at least a part of what's going on. They'll have their own problems in their own countries regarding Islam because they're all going to make their move all at once. They have to move all at once so that they can't, I guess it's kind of a barrage is what they're going to do. And
I'm just throwing this out there, though, as a possibility. I know they're all part of the UN, but if you think back to Iraq, U.S. did just about everything there. I know the British had a bit to do, but you don't really see.
No.
I picture the future. A lot of these nations are like, especially Australia, are a bit wimpy. They don't really like the U.S., the current government at the moment. And so do a lot of these others. They don't like the U.S. So what's to say, like, Trump gets in and these others, they're part, but they just sit there and do nothing. But I see the U.S. is going, I don't care about you guys. We're just going to take charge. And now what could happen? Then the others, they sort of get the benefit off of it, as history shows that they do a lot. Yeah. And Islam will just sort of fade out anyway, because when they won't even have to do anything. That's what I see as a possibility.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know how it's going to play. But I just see in the prophecy the notable, it's just always the US. It doesn't say the lion, the bear, or anything really participates that much.
No, no, it doesn't. But they're all, these notable ones are part of the goat. So obviously the first direction that the ram goes is west, and that's what we're seeing. We have been seeing that for a number of years now. It seems to be their first target, and I think that's why the U.S. has been primarily involved. And the other thing is, as well, is the U.S. has been, in the past, very much a supporter of Israel, and Islam is against Israel. So the United States is kind of tied in through Israel as well, Judeo-Christian nation. Russia, Vladimir Putin he's not kept it a secret. His greatest ally is the Eastern Orthodox Church. And part of what he's been saying about the West is that they've lost their compass, in that they've walked away from their Judeo-Christian foundation, and that's why all these problems are coming on. So Russia is actually technically today a Christian nation. Now, is Vladimir Putin a Christian? That could be debated, but their primary religion in Russia is Eastern Orthodox, which was tied all together with Christianity and the Catholic Church way back. However, they kind of went their own way, but we know that they're all coming together as well. And I believe, too, what's going to happen, we can see a movement now, this conservative movement, which really has its roots in Christianity, and it seems to be spreading all over the world as well. So we've got some dynamics that you're right in what you're saying. When we're looking out there today, it looks like, well, we're going to have to wait and watch. But we're seeing a shift, a global shift now to conservatism, and that's also going to infuriate the RAM because that's Islam, and Islam does not like Christianity and Judaism as well. So when the world becomes more sort of conservative, more Christian-based, and that's really where we're going. We're doing that in Europe, in England. There's rumblings. Russia, of course, is fighting Ukraine. But they haven't walked away. They really haven't walked away from their values. And we can see that even in the Olympics and other things where they don't want any part of this wokeism stuff. They're keeping it out of their country, which is pretty wise, actually. Okay, so yeah, we're going to have to see how this plays out in the future. It's going to be quite interesting. So the main thing is here, we've got a war coming that the West is going to be square in the middle of. So out of one of them, and here again, it's out of one of these horns, comes a little horn. Now this is in keeping with Daniel chapter 7, because it says out of one of the four beasts comes a little horn, and the four beasts are four kingdoms. And we see another little kingdom come out of one of the four beasts. And this is exactly what we see here again in Daniel chapter 8. Out of one of the four horns, which are kingdoms, the same thing as Daniel chapter 7, out of one of them came a little horn. And so we see here a direct link again from Daniel 8 to Daniel chapter 7. And it says that this little horn grew exceedingly great. Now, that's interesting, too, because the ram grew great, and the goat grew very great, and the little horn now becomes exceedingly great. In other words, he's going to take control of the whole world. And this is exactly what it says in Daniel chapter 7, is this fourth beast, which is the fourth kingdom that the little horn comes out of, it says it consumes, in Daniel chapter 7, the whole world, which is exactly what we see here. Now, once he begins this trek to become this exceedingly great power, it says it's going to go to the glorious land, which is Jerusalem. So this little horn power is going to end up in Jerusalem and rule the world from Jerusalem. And so we put this bit of information, the glorious land information, with Daniel 7, and we can see that he's going to rule the world from the glorious land, which is Jerusalem. Now let's move on to verse 10. And it grew up to the host of heaven. It cast some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. Well, if I'm reading right, it says that God's people are going to be like the stars in the heavens. So we are considered stars, according to our Father in heaven, if we're doing his bidding. And apparently, this seems to be talking about this little horn power that begins to persecute God's stars or his people. And it tramples them. So this is kind of sounding a little similar again to Daniel chapter 7, where it persecutes the saints of the Most High. Goes on to say in verse 11, he even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Now, in times past, this didn't make a lot of sense. There's a lot of different stories on what this exactly means. Everything from Antiochus Epiphanes to the Catholic Church instituting a priesthood that takes away the intercession of Yeshua in the most holy place in the heavens. And that sounds pretty good, but it's really on two counts here. He rises against, he exalts himself as high as Yeshua, the Prince of the Host, and he takes away the daily sacrifice. He actually does, by his daily Mass, takes away the intercession of Yeshua, so he does that kind of spiritually, but literally speaking, he does it again on a literal sense, is when he moves to Jerusalem. The tabernacle service will be in play. The Jews will build their tabernacle after the war in the Middle East because there will be nothing stopping them from building a temple. We know today that the Jews would build their temple if it wasn't for Islam. Well, you take Islam out of the way, they will build their temple. When the little horn goes to Jerusalem, they will stop the sacrificial services in Jerusalem, and this will be what the taking away the daily literally means. They do it on a spiritual sense by taking away the intercession of Yeshua and having us go through a priest. That's their teaching. And they also will do it literally by taking away the daily sacrifice that's going to be going on in Jerusalem in a sanctuary that will be built after the war in the Middle East. Now it goes on to say in Daniel chapter 8, verse 12 through 14, because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifice, and he cast truth to the ground, and he did this and prospered. Now don't miss this point here, because it's going to come back to us at the end of the prophecy in the interpretation of the vision. So we see here, because of transgression, an army is given over to the horn to oppose the daily. The horn, this kingdom, does not have an army of his own. But because sin is rampant in the world, in the kingdoms of the world, they give their armies to the little horn to oppose the daily. How does this play out? When they get control of Jerusalem, it's because armies have been given to them to take away the power of the Jewish people in their temple, and they will take control of the land, and Israel will be no longer in charge of the temple in Jerusalem. They will take away, they will stop the daily sacrifice system, and they will institute their own system. And this is when they institute, and it says he thinks to change times and laws. So the Jewish times and laws that they're observing in Jerusalem will be changed by the little horn, and they will regulate what happens not only in Jerusalem, but what happens in the whole world when they take control. And they will substitute the Jewish times, or I should say the biblical times, and really they're God's times. And so what he does, he changes the times, the set times, the appointed times that the Jews will reinstitute once they get control of the Temple Mount and they build their temple. They will reinstitute these sanctuary times. The little horn will come, take control of Jerusalem and the temple, and they will stop the daily sacrificial system going on there, and they will institute their own set times of worship. And we all know what those are. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the certain one who was speaking, "How long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation and the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot?" We really want to flesh this out. Is he asking here, how long will the whole vision be concerning the ram and the he-goat and the four horns and then the little horn? No, he's not asking that at all. He's asking exactly about the events that the little horn is doing, the activities of the little horn. The question is, how long is the little horn going to do this for, this transgression of desolation, the giving both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled out underfoot? Why do I say this? Because historical applications of this prophecy are declaring that the time period, this 2,300-day time period, is not 2,300 days at all, it's 2,300 years, and it starts way before the events of the little horn. If we're going to be consistent with what the prophecy says, that's why we need to go back to what the prophecy says. It says, how long is the little horn going to be doing its dirty deeds for? That's the same thing that Daniel was focused on in Daniel chapter 7, is how long is the little horn going to be doing its thing? The answer comes back for 1,260 days, or times and a half, or 42 months. As we get to Revelation, that time period is stated in different ways, same time period that we see. So the time period, the question is asked, how long is the little horn going to be doing its thing here? Specifically, the answer comes back, and he said for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed. It actually doesn't say days, it says evenings and mornings. You will note by the verse prior, it has to do with a sanctuary and a host and Jerusalem being trampled by the Gentiles. We see that in Luke, it's trampled by the Gentiles. And the answer comes back in Revelation, it says times and a half. It's going to be trampled underfoot. But now we see a different time period. Interesting. It says that 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. When was the sanctuary cleansed in the biblical sense? When is the sanctuary cleansed?
Day of Atonement?
Day of Atonement. Would it be fair to say that the Day of Atonement has to do with judgment?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Did we see a judgment happen in Daniel chapter 7?
Yeah.
When did the judgment happen in Daniel chapter 7?
Well, the judgment was around verse 11 and 12.
Yeah, actually 9 and 10 in Daniel chapter 7.
Yeah, 9 and 10, burning wheels, judgment in heaven. But that's the judgment in heaven too.
Well, that is the judgment in heaven. That's exactly right. That is the judgment in heaven. And the judgment, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Trumpets, which is the beginning, it's a 10-day process. It ends on the Day of Atonement. But it's interesting that we found, as we were looking at Daniel chapter 7, that the judgment happens during the time that the little horn is speaking. And we know that the little horn only gets time times and a half, which is 3.5 years, which is 1,260 days, or 42 months, right?
Yep.
That's what we know. This is fact. That's what the prophecy says. So we're told now that judgment happens, we know that from Daniel 7. Judgment happens during the time that the little horn is speaking. The question is, how long is this going to happen? How long are the events that the little horn is going to happen? And we're told here that at 2,300 evenings and mornings, the sanctuary is cleansed. So we know we're talking God's timing here. A morning and an evening, when it's in relation to the sanctuary times, are the time of the morning and evening sacrifices. So if we've got 2,300 morning and evening sacrificial times here in this chapter, we've actually got 1,150 days. We just divide 2,300 in half, and that's how many complete days we'll have. And guess what? This is the beautiful part of that, is that's 1,150 days. Is that within the time frame of the little horn? Yes, it is. It can't possibly be the 2,300 cannot be 2,300 days, because that would be way outside the length of time that the little horn has power. It has to be interpreted this way. It just plain doesn't work any other way. And it happens to be, now we're told something additional. We know from Daniel chapter 7 that the little horn has 3.5 years, 1,260 days. But we have no idea when that starting time is. It's not until we get to Daniel chapter 8 do we find the starting point. The starting point actually is from the time that the daily is taken away. Now do we see clearly why, unless we read all the prophecies that we can get a hold of, we don't know when the 3.5 year period starts. When we get to Daniel 8, we know when it starts. So when we count 1,150 days, well, lo and behold, that happens during the time that the little horn is doing its thing. So we have consistency between Daniel 8 and Daniel chapter 7. When we get to Daniel chapter 12, we have another time period that references the taking away of the daily, and that is the abomination of desolation. And that's also what Yeshua quoted in Matthew 24. So we know that the abomination of desolation did not happen in the past. It's going to happen in the future. And Yeshua said that this abomination of desolation would happen in Jerusalem, in a temple in Jerusalem, and that time period is 1,290. And so that actually does fit within our time frame, because we're told that the little horn is destroyed at that time period, but that is not the second coming. We still have a 1,290 day time period from Daniel chapter 12, and we also have another time period, and that is 1,335 days. We're not going to get into that, all those time periods right now, but we just want to note that with these other prophecies, we can actually see a greater timeline developing, but unless we use all the prophecies, we're not going to see that. And so we need to take advantage of all the material that we have, and we can see what is going on. So let's look at a couple more verses here, and we'll let you go here. Verse 15, Daniel chapter 8, verse 15. Then it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, then suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, who called and said, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So just like Matthew and Mark and Luke, he wanted to tell them, first off, that this vision is for the time of the end. Instead of going just into the vision, he first says, hey, you got to know something here. This vision, he says, so he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, Son of Man, the vision refers to the time of the end. You can grab a lot of different translations. They all bring out the same idea here. Is this vision, not the last verse of the vision, not the last few verses of the vision, but the whole vision here is for the time of the end. And he said, look, I'm making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation, for at the appointed time the end shall be. So this is in keeping with Yeshua again. What is the sign of your coming in the end of the age, the time of God's wrath? It's at the appointed time, the latter time of the indignation, at the appointed time, the moed, that's this word moed again, the appointed time the end shall be. So we know that the end is going to happen at the appointed time. Which appointed time? We don't know that yet. Actually, I got a pretty good idea, but most people do not understand, and we want to get into that because it's very, very important. We need to know which appointed time that Yeshua is going to show up. Why is that important? Because there's going to be a counterfeit Messiah that's going to show up prior to Yeshua's coming, and the whole world is going to be accepting him. And this got to do with this time frame. Once the little horn is destroyed, the counterfeit Messiah is going to come, and he's going to be set up on a throne in Jerusalem. But he comes prior to that time, and we can know who he is, when he comes. And so if we don't know when Yeshua, which appointed time Yeshua is going to come, we will be deceived into thinking that one claiming to be Yeshua is, we're going to think he's Yeshua because we do not understand the time frame, and God has made it very clear when he is going to come. So we're going to leave the interpretation. We're going to go look in the interpretation. We're going to save that for next week. So we'll end it there. We've kind of gone through and made some conclusions along the way. But we want to go through the interpretation and see if the conclusions that we're coming to along the way are matching the interpretation that Gabriel gave to Daniel. So we'll do that next week. So I want to thank you for joining along with us this week from Camp Tamid in our prophetic studies as we go through these prophecies. And let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll let you go. Father in heaven, we thank you again for your word that is sure. And Father, we thank you that you have given us advance warning to the events that are going to transpire here at the time of the end. We ask that you help us to understand and share these things with others so they too can prepare for what's coming, and that they can make their peace with you before it's too late. We pray these things in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.